He has to remember to kind of keep close relationships but not fully disclose who he is. And while that's very protective and probably for the best, it's not good for his mental health. My name is Dr. Drea Letamendi, and I'm a licensed clinical psychologist. Both Spider-Man and Batman experienced a devastating loss when they were kids. Losing a primary caregiver is considered such a big traumatic event for kids especially. The trauma, though, is really the interpretation of the event. Trauma is not only the distressing event, it's the emotional processing of what happens during that event. And it's so individualized to each person. So whereas Batman maybe felt a sense of loss of control, a strong burden to take care of not only himself, but the city, even the world after that event, Peter Parker has more of a positive developmental growth coming out of his trauma. This is called post-traumatic growth, where he starts to, of course, he's going through all of the normal grieving process after losing Uncle Ben, but he's also starting to realize his own sense of self-efficacy and agency and some sense of responsibility for his own person. So his expectations are not excessive, they're not narcissistic, they're not unrealistic. He believes that as an individual, he could do more. He could really make a difference in the city. We see Peter Parker on such a more accelerated recovery because of his willingness to seek social support, his willingness to see a realistic version of himself and the world, and to let this tragedy give him a sense of positive purpose versus a vindictive goal. What happened to Peter Parker was not his choice. He was essentially transformed, violated, disfigured. You could think of all different ways in which he might interpret this big change in his life. Also, as a young person, you're already going through a lot of social, emotional, and personality changes that we can think of this transformation as happening in some kind of alignment or co-occurrence with his own personal individual development. And so a lot of things are going to feel out of whack. A lot of things are going to feel like almost disorienting. Maybe he feels he's outside of his body. Maybe he feels like he's looking at his own hand or his own limbs and feel like that's not mine, that's not my hand, that's not my limb. And it's going to take time for him to start to associate the abilities that he has and also some of the disfigurements, if you will, some of the unexpected changes in his body to be fully a part of him. In some ways, if I were his therapist, I'd work on grieving the old Peter Parker. What did he miss, or what does he miss about the non-Spider-Man Peter Parker? Is it the innocence? Is it that his body was not changed? Is it that he didn't feel this extra sense of burden? And to work through some appropriate level of grieving his previous body and understanding how his new body is in alignment with who he is as a person. He can still hold the same values and principles. He can still feel that fundamentally he's the same person, but he does have to work on integrating these new changes, even if they're ones that he doesn't like, into his sense of self, his repertoire.
Tally-ho.
There's a therapeutic technique for getting over our fears, and it's called exposure therapy. It's basically where a counselor works with an individual who has an anxiety disorder or a phobia and gradually exposes them to that feared stimulus. In this case, if we're thinking of tall buildings and leaping from building to building, in and of itself, of course, that could be very dangerous. But if we know fundamentally that Peter is equipped to do this kind of thing, he has all of the abilities to manage this, it's really about overcoming the fear of heights, the fear of falling, whatever it might be that's troubling him.
My Uncle Ben was killed. It was my fault. I lost Gwen.
She was my MJ.
I think it could have been disconcerting for some of us to see multiple Spider-Mans and to notice that all of them have their unique losses and histories, and they're coming together, and it's a bit of a violation, right, to talk about or even hint at their own experiences and histories. There is something therapeutic, though, to interacting with other selves in the multiverse. The idea that had you taken one path or gone a different way, your life could be completely different than what it is now. And we actually do that a lot psychologically. We may not know that we're doing this, but we often think about what could have happened or what could be based on the decisions that we're making. It's called counterfactual thinking. It's when there's a critical event, maybe something really meaningful, something significant, maybe even a trauma that we go through. And our brains kind of take us through different pathways of, gosh, what would have happened had I not, left the house at that time? Or what would have happened if I took responsibility and did something differently? And a lot of times, all of those ruminations, while they're very normal, they can create a sense of sadness, confusion, a lot of curiosity about what could be. And in small doses, it can be really healthy for us, considering how important our agency is, how important the experiences that we have can be toward our personhood. But it can also be unhealthy. And to name another superhero or supervillain, Wanda Maximoff is an example of someone who took that counterfactual thinking and just created this whole world of what she would have liked her life to be. It's an ultra fantasy. So when we get too stuck in our alternate versions of ourselves, we could lose a sense of actual control. We could lose a sense of who we are today now in this moment. And anything we can do to ground ourselves back, to take that lesson, maybe that Peter Parker learned when interacting with his other selves, and realize that could be informative for him. That could be a moment of discovery. It could be a moment of feeling relief and even a sense of empowerment for his opportunities.
Can I come in?
No!
This is a burden that a lot of superheroes have to face. It's the duality of your identities. It's knowing that the more and more people you let into your whole life, the more and more people you inform about your superhero alter, the more that they might be at risk. And fundamentally, that is probably, I'd say, the scariest thing for superheroes, especially for Spider-Man, who knows what it's like to lose. So that guardedness is really important for him. He has to remember to kind of keep close relationships, but not fully disclose who he is, not fully be open and authentic with everybody in his life. And while that's very protective and probably for the best, it's not good for his mental health. When we're not authentic, we're not showing our full sides, we're not fully whole when we interact with people close to us, we, over time, can start to feel detached. We could have low self-esteem. We could feel even a sense of identity crisis. Does anyone really know who I am and what I'm about? And I can't share the things that are really critical in my life. And not only can I not share them, I can't feel a sense of closeness with people in the way that I might want to feel. So there's a lot of different occupational hazards when it relates to superheroes who have dual identities.
Spider Menace! Governments around the world launch investigations into the murderer known as Spider-Man.
Whether you're a villain or not, anytime you have a fixation on a person who represents your grievance, that is a bad pathway. In other words, that fixation, that narrow-mindedness, that sense of vindictiveness, those traits over time can be really destructive, especially if that figure that you're blaming, that figure that represents all of your sense of anger and hatred, is present, that you see that person, they're within your sights, they're alive, they're present. That could just perpetuate that sense of vindictive narcissism. And I add narcissism because it's the idea that you are somehow in this relationship with that person, even though they may not feel the same way. You've almost exaggerated a sense of importance about yourself. And the interesting thing is, a lot of times when these villains feel this immense sense of needing retribution and looking for some sense of conviction or some sense of recovery, a lot of times the hero isn't even paying attention to them. And that can be absolutely dissatisfying and upsetting. So it kind of creates this cycle. And of course, it ends in destruction. The fact that Spider-Man is kind of flippant and has a lighthearted sense of humor and personality may even drive these factors to become more and more excessive and extreme. Think about wanting someone to pay attention to you, wanting someone to take you seriously, wanting them to fully hear your grievance and why you're so upset, and the other person is lighthearted, dismissive, doesn't really see you eye to eye, isn't even willing to give you the time of day.
So are you like a cow or a Dalmatian?
I am the Spot.
That unbalance can be particularly unsatisfying, but it could also just ramp up these negative feelings and create a really dangerous situation, dangerous relationships between Peter Parker and the villains that oppose him.
Night.
Night. You look nice.
Peter Parker is still growing up, and he's experiencing imposter syndrome probably more days than not, meaning that even though he has these amazing abilities, he's super intelligent, he's socially quite capable, he has a lot of amazing qualities, and yet he feels unsure of himself. He has some self-doubts. Some of this is due to simply his developmental phase, like where he is in his life. Some of it is due to personal loss and knowing that he hasn't been perfect. He's made mistakes. He has been responsible for some serious things. And a part of it is also when he is Spider-Man, he may feel like that version of himself might be more in alignment with who he truly is. So when he can't integrate Peter Parker and Spider-Man and he's sort of feeling vulnerable, he may show elements of that sense of self-doubt, that sense of ineffectiveness, a sense of having to question his actions.